And we are recording. Hi, Casey. So happy to have you. So basically what I'll start doing is kind of give us an overview of your path to education to where you are now, and then we'll get into student questions.
Okay, great. Well, my name's Casey, and I'm a third-year clinical psychology doctorate student at the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego. I was an undergrad at SDSU. I graduated in 2017. I met your teacher through my involvement in the peer advising office for the psychology department. That was a great experience. At SDSU, I was involved in various organizations related to psychology. I was a part of academic advising, as I mentioned. I was a part of the peer education program through Counseling and Psychological Services. That's a wonderful experience. And then I was also tangentially involved with Psychi and the Psychology Club and other organizations on campus for psych students. So I began grad school in the fall of 2017. I jumped straight from undergrad into grad school. I'm doing a PsyD program, which is a bit distinct from a PhD program in that a PsyD is more clinically oriented. It focuses on the actual practice of doing psychology in the field. There still is a research component, so I still am working on my dissertation as we speak. It's always fun stuff. Yeah, so is that Ash? That was your dog's name, right? Ash?
Yeah, it is. Okay. I just realized my video was still on even though I muted myself, but anyways, continue.
Okay, so so grad school. I'm at the APA accredited program at the California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego through Alliant, which is the more common name for it. So third year out of the 4 years total of my grad program. While in grad school, I've taken classes related to teaching me the skills needed to be a practicing psychologist and somebody who can in 5 years time sit for licensure in the state of California. And so for the first, what's that?
I said awesome.
And so for the first 3 years of grad school, I've been taking classes. I've been working on my dissertation. I've been attending it's called a practicum, which is kind of like an internship. It's a little different, but it's a part of the class I take, and it kind of gives me those experiences in the field. Did you want me to talk about like my classes, like what I've taken so far, or like what I've done at practicum sites? Is there anything you want me to focus on?
We'll get into that probably with some student questions. So just an overview for now.
Okay, cool. So yeah, knock on wood, fingers crossed, I'll graduate in May of 2021. So I'm getting closer to the finish line. And yeah, it's been a very long journey through the educational system, but I'm excited to see what the future holds in that regard. So yeah, that's kind of just a overview of my path in undergrad and grad school and to where I'm at now. So
awesome, so cool. So kind of to start with more about like the path before we get into like current education. So you had mentioned in your PowerPoint and before that you had majored in philosophy. So what really made you choose psychology, and would it have been maybe beneficial to keep a philosophy degree, a minor or whatever?
yeah, I noticed that in the comments and the questions, and for me, I didn't really have like a particular interest in philosophy. I think it was something more I just kind of picked when I applied to SDSU as a high school senior because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to major in, and it was like, oh, this sounds kind of cool. And so I
Yeah.
tried it. I took one class. It wasn't really for me, but I'm glad I got to take the class. And I think to answer that question, if in regards to if there was a benefit to having a philosophy minor, I would say to that person, like, if you're really interested in philosophy, like, by all means, like, sign up for the minor. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. And I think that question just in general is it's very specific to each student. So
Yeah.
like what worked for me might, be different for somebody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's always, there's no wrong or right answer about having, like, do you need a minor? Do you need a double major? It's kind of what can you realistically do? And if you can't realistically do both, it's going to look more negative than positive, right? So kind of knowing yourself, right? So let's see. What were some key factors that helped you decide that you wanted to pursue a doctorate degree over like a master's or etc.?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that drew me to a PsyD program in particular is just the amount of flexibility that a career as a psychologist has. I can kind of wear a lot of different hats as a professional. I can do not just psychotherapy, but also formal assessment, so psychological testing. I'm going to be getting training at my upcoming internship specifically about psychological testing, so I'm really excited to learn more about that. And then also, potentially if I was interested down the road, there are also opportunities for consultation, working with organizations and giving my input on things as they relate to psychology. And who knows, maybe even teaching or research, which aren't particularly at the forefront of my career goals right now, but it's always nice to have that avenue open if I'm interested down the road.
Which you definitely have more kind of capabilities of doing all of those things with a doctorate than you do with a sort of master's or lower clinical degree.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. Do you have any regrets, or would you change anything about pursuing a PsyD or anything you wish you had known?
I guess I wish I had known, like, and this is one of those things where it's always like hindsight bias is perfectly 2020. I mean, I wish I had known like what I was really into when I had started in the field, which is like such an impossible thing. But like my main theoretical orientation is acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really this kind of newer school of psychotherapy that's really based on you know behavioral science, and I just find all of that whole realm of the field absolutely fascinating. And I wish I had known that, so I could have tailored my clinical experiences and my learning experiences that way, and maybe even done some research in the field. But that's why we go to grad school, is to kind of find out what it is that we really do like. And I've been fortunate to have gotten that experience, no doubt.
Awesome. That's so cool. So now, like, going into education. So I'll start kind of like in some undergrad and then go to graduate school. So the first one, and I thought this was an interesting question I hadn't really gotten yet, but in what ways is graduate school different and similar to undergrad? And what would you recommend for anyone thinking about graduate school?
Well, where do I even
I
begin
know.
with that one? I would say, at least in my experience, grad school has been very different from undergrad, in the sense that the stakes are higher a little bit. Like, you can't get lower than a B minus, so you have to retake the class.
True.
In grad school, like, if you think you have to manage your time in college or in undergrad, grad school is just like on a whole nother level. So I think being able to have those time management skills in place is something that, if you found that you could just skate by in undergrad, it's not really that possible in undergrad, or in grad school, excuse me. And I think, the classes that, I've taken in grad school feel a lot more directly relevant to my career as as a future psychologist. You know, because I'm really learning about how to do kind of the nuts and bolts of, you know, therapy or assessment. And you know, that's not something that you get in undergrad. And so like there's always this kind of disconnect between like, oh, you know, I'm learning this in class, but when am I actually going to use this like as like a therapist or like a mental health professional or a professional in psychology? And for me, my experience in grad school has really given that to me, which has been really exciting and kind of helping me adjust to really stepping into the shoes of being like a psychologist, so to speak. In terms of how they're similar, they're really not. I feel like, you know, I think especially at least my experience in grad school, you know, the main similarity has been, you know, I go to classes and, you know, I come home and I do homework, and it's similar in those regards where you have a lot of things you need to do, but it's a different level of magnitude, I feel like.
Absolutely. Like, I don't know if you're familiar, but like Bloom's taxonomy of kind of higher levels of thinking. So in undergrad, you're kind of learning to critically think about topics. And then as you move to graduate school, you're applying those topics that you kind of,
Yeah.
right? Um, anyways, that's really cool. And do you think that like all the things you were involved in undergrad kind of helped you with the time organization? Like, is that something you'd recommend to people to like really get involved so you do learn that kind of time management and prioritization?
Yeah, you know, I think that can definitely be like a great way of learning those skills. Um, you know, I think it depends on where a person's at. You know, if they have a lot of difficulty with time management beforehand, like, you know, starting small, and that's an idea in the field of psychology that you know, I've talked about a lot with clients who have these big goals. You know, you really want to start small and kind of work your way up. So,
Yeah.
you know, don't bite off more than you can chew if you're, you know, still an undergrad, and you have a lot of time to kind of you know, apply time management skills. You know, if you're taking Psych 201 as a freshman or a sophomore, there'll still be a lot of experiences for you to kind of build that skill. So by the time you're a senior, you know, you can go out, and whether you're going to go to, you know, straight into the workforce or into grad school, you know, because those are time management is a skill that transfers way beyond, you know, just psychology. So
For sure. So what is kind of like the PsyD program will look like? So now getting into kind of like the classes to moving to clinical, like what is the structure and requirements?
yeah, so every program is a little different in that regard. My program is the 4-year program, which is a bit more on the accelerated end. So I think a difference between like the PsyD program and the PhD program at Alliance is that, you know, I got a chance to start doing kind of clinical work right away as a first year student. So, you know, I was probably a couple months into grad school before I got to see my first client. And compared to like the PhD program, who they took classes for a year and then they got placed at their practicum programs. It was a while before they got a chance to kind of do things of that nature. But for me, that was something that I really valued, and that kind of played a big role in why I chose my specific program. But I think in most, you know, in pretty much every program, you know, you're going to have classes that you take, and there's usually kind of like a sequence that you kind of work through, and just like at SDSU. And those, they all build on each other. They're all foundational things that you need to go out and be a future doctor of psychology. And there are similar, you know, competencies that the APA, the American Psychological Association, requires all accredited programs to teach. So you'll get a very wide variety of topics, you know, just as a standard part of the education, like the therapy, assessment, the history of psychology, all sorts of different things.
Absolutely. So cool. So was it difficult or did you feel prepared moving from like taking what you learned in class and then applying it as a first year doctoral student to work with clients? Like what was that like?
Yeah, that was a really interesting time. That was something where you know, it was kind of one of those things where you just you can't really learn it in a textbook. So like at some point, you kind of had to just do it. Um, at at practicum sites, you're not going to be doing it alone. You'll have a supervisor who, especially for first year students, you're going to get a lot of oversight from, and they're good supervisors and they're bad supervisors. But I was very fortunate to have a wonderful supervisor who provided me with an experience to kind of challenge myself and push my boundaries. And that's something that I'm very, I look back and I got to work with that client for a full year, and it was it was a really meaningful experience. So I think there are certainly going to be times where a new grad student in psychology is going to feel like, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. That imposter syndrome is it's very common. And, it's something that, with experience, it definitely becomes a lot easier, I feel like.
Absolutely. Definitely, I would be terrified, I think. But so where was I going to go? I had oh, that's what it was. So you've mentioned clinical practicum a few times. What is that like? Is it like an internship you have to do? Is it multiple? Do you apply or choose? And do you get paid to do them?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with like the difference between like internship and practicums. There's
Mhm.
actually like a pretty fine difference between that. As part of the last year of my program, and part of all or most or pretty much all, I think,
Yeah.
APA accredited programs, doctorate students complete a full-time year-long clinical internship. And those are distinct from practicum placements, where those are technically considered classes that you're taking through the school. The school is kind of sending you there, and you work under the supervision of a psychologist at that practicum site. But ultimately, you're doing this as part of your classwork. It's kind of similar to the field work experience class
Yeah.
at SDSU, where you go back to campus and you do all that whole thing after you go to your agency. But yeah, you don't get paid for practicums. The majority of practicums don't pay you. Some sites give you a stipend, which is nice, like $200 or something like that per month, which I've never been at a site where that's been the case. But the internships are paid if they're an APA accredited internship.
Cool.
It's a requirement that you do get a stipend. So I'll be getting a stipend next year, which is exciting. I've never been paid any sort of money to do psychology before, so that'll be a
That's
thrill.
so cool.
I know, right? For me, I got placed at my first practicum, which was at San Diego Job Corps. Great site, but after that, I applied to practicum sites. The school offers you like a list of all the available sites, and you pick a certain number and you apply to those sites, and you get interviews, and then you wait and you find out, and then it's basically the same as applying for a job.
Yeah.
Applying for an internship is pretty different. It's a very structured process. It's kind of this weird mix between applying to grad school and applying to like actual jobs, where you have to get letters of recs, you have to write a bunch of
Transcripts.
essays, transcripts, work samples. And then, I mean, this might be changing given the current climate, but before, you would, because you're applying to sites all across the country, so you'd be going on this kind of long tour of internship interviews. That could be on the East Coast or the Midwest or wherever, and it's suggested that you apply to usually over 10 sites to kind of get a good shot at matching. And so, I've known people who've gone on month-long trips where they're just traveling continuously. That again might be changing because of the fallout from COVID, but it's a very demanding process. And then after you're done, you rank all the sites that you interviewed at, and they rank you, and it goes into this algorithm, and it spits out on about a month later after the whole process wraps up, where you find out where you matched to.
Kind of like Bumble or Tinder, swipe
yeah,
left.
it's almost like exactly like the sorority recruitment process at SDSU. I feel like it's very interesting in that regard.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just came out on the other end of that. I'm actually going to be able to stay in San Diego for my APA internship, which is nice. So I'll be going to Alvarado Parkway Institute, which is right across the way from SDSU. So I'm excited.
So cool. So to get in a little bit to what you did at these kind of practicums / what you're going to do before I ask more educational questions. So you mentioned Job Corps, and this is a residential facility. So what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, so that was a residential job training campus. Job Corps is like a federally funded like program that teaches low income transition aged youth. So that's like anywhere from 16 to 24 individuals from kind of lower income areas, lower income backgrounds, and they receive free job training, free housing, free high school education. Great program. And I, as a part of that practicum, I was part of, it's called their health and wellness department, where it's kind of similar to Cal Poly. Job Corps was actually very similar to a college campus in that regard, where people were living there and they were going to school and kind of, similar age range, similar presentation, concerns with anxiety, depression, substance use, adjustment to a new situation, all those sorts of things. And so there I got to do, individual psychotherapy. I ran a couple of group classes on anger management and emotional coping. I got to do substance abuse assessments. I was lucky in the sense that I got a very thorough first year practicum experience. Oftentimes it's more of kind of like a shadowing opportunity, kind of just observe what the role is like. And you're not really doing a whole lot hands-on, but I got really lucky in that regard, where I got to have that sort of experience right away.
That is so cool. So when you say residential, it's the clients or patients that are staying there. It's not like you're staying there, correct?
Yeah, they live on the campus, and they go to their dorms after the day ends. I get to go home, thankfully. That would have been it's kind of like Hogwarts almost, where I have to stay there. But no, I haven't experienced a site like that yet. But yeah.
Crazy. And then, so your next one was working at the Burn Institute, correct?
No, that was actually what I did. The Burn Institute was the field placement I did through SDSU in is it 495, right?
Yeah,
491. Okay. And in that one, well, after that, my next practicum placement was at a place called Southern California Recovery Centers, which was also a residential rehab program for men with substance abuse concerns. And that was kind of more of an experience that was similar to private practice, I feel like, almost. I had a caseload of about 7 to 8 clients throughout the year, and I saw these guys for weekly psychotherapy that they were mandated to go to as part of the program. That was an interesting experience, working in kind of an interdisciplinary setting for sure, where I got to work with psychiatrists and substance abuse counselors and house managers, and it was a very interesting experience. And I think I got a lot of good opportunities to really see what it was like doing long-term therapy, because most of the clients I saw there were for longer than a year, or for about a year. 6 months to a year, where at Job Corps it was more short term. It was kind of more like up to 3 months maximum, even though I did get to see one client for a full year. It was more on the short term end. And yeah, that was what I did in my second year. And then third year, where I'm at right now, is the UCSD Burn unit. And that is an inpatient. Mostly I'm doing, it's called behavioral consultation. I'm part of a team that, we basically meet with clients or meet with patients who they've just been severely burned and they've been admitted to the unit. And there I'm doing a lot of kind of crisis intervention, a lot of short-term assessment, a lot of short-term psychotherapy. That's a really interesting experience. It's a lot different from being a more of a traditional, come to my office every week and let's talk for an hour type of provider. It's more like I'm on my feet, and I don't. Every day is kind of like a new situation where there might be somebody who's been admitted to the unit, and I kind of have to go put out that fire, so to speak, for lack of a better. It's very similar to almost like psychological first aid, I feel like, because people are in a lot of distress, and being able to kind of join them, while they're going through this really difficult period in their life is a really special thing. I feel like it's a real privilege to be able to do that, because I've met some really inspirational people there. And I get to wear a white coat, which is weird, but it's a cool experience.
I love that. That's super cool. So we'll get more into those in a minute as well. Okay. But kind of going back, so something like I've talked to students about, like this differences between PhD and PsyD is, one's more, of course, we talked about like research-based versus clinically based. And then as far as financials, right? So it's usually a PsyD's housed in a kind of for-profit, because they're not that much emphasis on research, which is usually where PhD funding comes in. So how, what do people usually do for this? Like, are there scholarships, student loans, or are you kind of just like, I'm going to be in debt?
Yeah, so for me, like I'm in a pretty fortunate position where the program was in San Diego, and it's right by my house. So, I get to live with my parents and for a little while longer and save on very costly living expenses. And as of now, my parents are committed to helping me out with loans. And I would say that like a decision to enroll in a professional or a program at a professional school is like, it's one that, if you decide to do that, I really encourage you to put a lot of thought into that decision, because it is a very big commitment. It's a big investment that you're making in yourself. I've known, I've had classmates in my cohort who, they were there for like a semester or two, and then they dropped out, and that's a big financial hit. That's like $40K right there. On top of whatever living expenses they might have had to shell out. So, it's definitely something that, is not a decision to kind of make lightly. It's not something where you can go, oh, I think I kind of want to be a psychologist. The PsyD program. That's definitely not the right attitude to have going into something like that. And I think in terms of financing it, there are certainly options. I think loans are part of that calculus to a very big degree, and probably like 99.9% of people. There are scholarships that are available. You kind of have to do the work and apply to them. I've gotten a few scholarships during my first 2 years, but it wasn't really it wasn't like, a significant chunk of the overall kind of total cost. But it was still something, and this sort of thing, every drop counts. There are federal programs that, I hope are maintained through, over the next couple of years that I can't bring to mind the specific name of it, but, if you work in a federally funded organization for a certain number of years, you're eligible to get your loans forgiven, which is great. Hopefully that's something that is still around when I'm a professional. There are certain routes, through like the military that you can go if especially if you're interested in working with veterans. I've had a bunch of classmates who are that's where they're oriented towards, and they're able to not just, have the military, pay off their loans, but, on their internship, there was a woman who was a few years ahead of me. She got a internship through the VA for her last year in school in Hawaii, and she got like an $80,000 stipend for the year, which is insane,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
the military is definitely not for everyone. It wasn't for me, but like the benefits are certainly not to be ignored. Because if you're there for a certain amount of years, you have access to a whole litany of great things that will make your life a lot easier in the long run. But that's also another thing to consider.
And
And
you do
I
have to
think,
consider too that like the military, like if you do go that route, you will be required deployments,
yeah,
regardless. Like it's not like they're just paying you to eventually get your degree. You owe them a certain amount of time and giving back as well. But it is a
yeah,
great option. Like my brother-in-law did that through his med school. So he was able to do it and liked it. But again, that is something you need to consider.
yeah, yeah. I think like one of the biggest points to drive home, just like in regards to making this decision, is that this really has to be like, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for like, there's not a chart that you can look at that says like, oh, like, this is the kind of degree or this is the kind of program that I want to go in on. I think it has to be a very personal choice. And I think like, like it's important to reflect on what your values are for getting into this field. And, I think when I did that, something I really valued was, kind of being close to home, being able to, being able to do things on my own terms. And I think, the PsyD program at Alliance in San Diego offered me kind of the best, the best alignment in terms of what I wanted
Yeah,
out of a grad school program. Yeah.
absolutely. Where was I going to go with that? Graduate school. Oh no, I've been having like mini strokes lately. I don't know what's wrong with me. All right, well, I'm just going to forget about that. Maybe it'll come to me later. So would you say that there are like, oh, that's what I was going to say. So PsyD programs too, something to consider. They're still fairly new in recognition, right? So like I can I have a feeling that by the time a lot of like freshmen are going into graduate school or something, there are going to be a lot more PsyD programs housed in, not just professional or for-profit schools. Like as it becomes more recognized, we're going to get better at how we fund them, etc. But yeah, it is important to know, like, it's kind of still new, and with funding coming from research, that's kind of where you see that big discrepancy in pay. I think that's my hope
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Same here. That is certainly my hope as well. And I think, like, I think one thing like people don't really realize is that, like the degree is different, but like when you're a licensed psychologist, you have the same license as somebody with a PhD. And if anything, if that's what you really are interested in, I think the general public doesn't really know they don't really know a whole lot of, oh, like what's a PsyD, what's a PhD, what's an
Yeah.
LCSW, an LPC. There's so many acronyms, after our names that, if you're really interested in doing like, using psychology in kind of an applied manner, like as a professional, I think, a PsyD program will provide you with many opportunities to really get good training and really be able to sell yourself as a professional in that regard.
Yeah. Also, like something Mackenzie had mentioned in the last interview was, or I don't know if it was in the interview or after, but she was saying that a lot of, you're not dealing with a lot of people in a clinical program. So they have doctorates, but most people in a clinical program have also done clinical work, right? So like at SDSU, most of our professors, they've done academic work and research, not a lot of clinical one-on-one things. And that's really a huge difference between a PhD and a PsyD, is you're going to be treated by or taught by people who have had a clinical practice or have been working in clinical settings versus just academia and theoretically talking about it, right? Um,
Yeah, was that a Freudian slip there?
yeah.
No, I'm kidding. But yeah, absolutely. I think, all of my professors, or the vast majority of my professors in grad school, have had a lot of experience, kind of doing the same things that I wanted to be doing
Yeah.
in the field. And I think, having, that sort of, you know, uh, people that you're learning from, not just, in terms of learning about technique, but also, kind of just getting mentorship about, what, these more practical matters about, what should I do if I want to have, this sort of career in psychology or that sort of career in psychology. That mentorship element of it, I think, is super important as well.
Yeah, and especially if you are doing like wanting to do clinical versus research, you want someone who's done that, right? Like as your
Yeah.
mentor, they know the processes rather than, again, theoretically thinking about them. All right. So in general, like we've talked a lot about the difference between PsyD and PhD, and we're going to continue a little bit. So as far as like qualities that these types of programs look for in their applicants, would you say there's a really big discrepancy between PsyD and PhD?
Yeah, I think there is. I think PsyD programs, because they're more clinically oriented. I think people who have maybe a greater breadth and depth of like life experiences, maybe out of academic psychology, and like really experimental psychology. I think that plays really well in sorts of programs. I mean, research is still like certainly a component of programs, but I think if you're somebody who is interested in, maybe you're kind of in the middle of changing a career and you're older, I think like there are certainly many individuals in the PsyD program and Align who have kind of similar backgrounds, where they're looking to kind of find a new career, but they have all these really, really kind of rich, relevant experiences that play really well. Because with PsyD programs, the main goal, well, not the main, but like a big focus of it is, having those sorts of interpersonal skills necessary to be, a strong professional psychologist, which goes a lot more than, maybe, just being able to look at a data set. Not that I'm saying that isn't important. Like you will be
Yeah.
doing that in any doctorate program that's APA accredited. And I think but I think that is something that is a pretty you know significant difference between qualities that PhD programs might be looking for versus qualities that PsyD program might be looking for. With any PhD program, they're going to have an interest in your background and research for sure, because that is a focus of the majority of PhD programs.
Yeah,
So
especially if they're going to fund you for
yeah,
something, it's going to be for research. So,
yeah,
so as far as like, obviously both do require research. I cannot talk. Is the process of dissertation pretty much the same? And what is
yeah,
yours on?
yeah, yeah. Given the whole elevator pitch,
Yep.
so yeah, I think the process is pretty much the same between kind of all programs. I think at different schools, there are different kind of expectations for dissertations. I think at you know like kind of more research intensive schools, like you might be expected to really do this like kind of multi-year study, where it takes basically the entire duration of your time there or something like that. And it's a major like labor of love. And that's not to say that like mine isn't the same, because this has been something that I've been working on since I got there in the fall of 2017. But I'm currently in the process of preparing to defend my proposal and submit, not my actual dissertation yet, unfortunately, but I am getting in the process of doing that, scheduling that on the books, and submitting all of the things I need to submit to the IRB so I can be cleared to start collecting data. What I'm doing my research on, or my dissertation on, is the relationship between the big five trait of conscientiousness and baseball statistics. I'm specifically looking at, for those of you who don't watch baseball, it's a statistic called the walk, which has been described as, like something that you need, like, quote unquote discipline for. And so I'm looking to see if, there are professional baseball players out there who their scores on the big five measure of conscientiousness, which is kind of about the same thing about discipline. I'm kind of looking to see if there's a correlation between the construct of conscientiousness and that statistic in baseball, which, surprisingly, there haven't really been any studies done just in relationship to baseball performance and psychological personality traits, even though it's really often talked about as like a very psychologically focused game. My dissertation chair is Dr. Stephen Bucky. He is the team psychologist for the Padres. So found to make a lot of really interesting inroads through working with him. And, I think just as somebody, I think research, like, if you're fortunate enough to get that opportunity, like, you should make it about something that you really like, because this is like your project. This is like an original thing that you're creating, and like, it sounds like this big, this big kind of scary thing at the start, but like, I think like a great place to really take that first step of this really like long journey is by really considering like what you like about psychology and kind of starting from there. Because in my own experience, that has made kind of the writing process of my proposal so much easier. And, in like a weird way, I'm actually kind of excited to, go about collecting data for this. Like somewhat like fortuitously, like, given how COVID has kind of shut everything down. Once I get clearance through the IRB, like, it'll be a lot easier for me to reach out to professional athletes, given just social media and kind of the technology that we have now through like disseminating like my measures through Qualtrics and collecting data that way. Like, it's like a strangely like very opportune time for me to get done. So knock on wood, this time next year when I'm talking to you, Cassie, like, hopefully it'll be in person, A, and B, hopefully I'll have my actual dissertation defended by then. Knock on wood.
Yeah, so kind of like the follow-up to that, and you pretty much touched on it, but so a student asked, like, what is it like doing research, and why do so many students have this idea that it's boring or that it's not for them?
Yeah, I think, research is pretty essential to the field of psychology. Like, I think, like, you can't be a good therapist, or you can't really, like, I think understanding research of any kind is like essential to being like just a competent professional in general, being able to kind of look at, okay, what does the evidence say works, and being able to integrate research findings from whatever it is that you might be interested in into your practice, so whatever it is that you do as a professional, I think is like a really essential skill to be successful in this world. And I think, like, I don't think everybody has to be, I want to, publish, hundreds of peer-reviewed articles. And, I'm certainly not that way. I think, depending on your interest in psychology, even if you're not really like interested in doing research, but, you want to do the PhD route, I strongly recommend that you get involved with research at SDSU. Even though I wasn't interested in doing research as like a career, I still got involved after I graduated. I wish I'd gotten involved with SDSU, but I got involved with the UCSD OCD laboratory, and that was like a really fascinating experience because it was also like clinically relevant, because I got to do assessments with patients who had OCD, and I got to learn more about what OCD like presents like in practice. And like I still like rely on that knowledge, like when I'm talking about like in an interview, like a specific like unique population that I might have worked with, because that's not something you see every day in clinic. So like I think like research has other tangible, like being involved in research has other tangible benefits beyond just, adding another CV in your cap, or, just doing something because someone, on a Zoom call said you should,
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. And like you also mentioned, like it's ultimately about finding something that you like to research. Like if you're interested in working with clinical populations and yet you're running data for healthcare providers, you're probably not going to see a big match in like your interest in research and what you're currently doing. You want to do something that's actually working with clients, maybe taking like baseline studies to follow-up studies about a new treatment option, what have you. So really matching your interests with the research you choose to do. Because it will be really boring. Like I remember in stats, for example, right? You're told to run data on this research. And it's like, I don't care crashes at the corner of Lamont and who cares? Like, right? Like that's not something as a behavioral professional that I'm interested in. So don't let stats ruin it for you. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, cool. So let's see. Dissertation, Oh, and so kind of you mentioned in your PowerPoints, etc. So you at this point do have a master's but are still looking towards the PhD program or PsyD program. So how does that kind of work and what does that look like?
Yeah, so that master's it's considered like a non-terminal master's. So you get it in the process of completing your doctorate degree. And that was, like I think a lot of programs do offer that. I think the main tangible benefit beyond just saying, oh, hey, like I got my master's, for doctorate internships, and kind of more advanced practicum sites as part of the, for billing reasons and insurance reasons, like that had to be like a provider who who held a master's degree.
Right.
But if you don't complete, the program, you're not leaving with nothing, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's still options that you can get involved with, like teaching at a community college or things like that. And there are also another thing that you can do while you're enrolled in, I forgot to mention this, which actually is a pretty big benefit, is that you can register with the state to become a psych assistant, a psychological assistant. Mm-hmm. And that's basically like, it's similar to like a practicum experience where you fill out paperwork through the school and through your future supervisor, and you're working as like a doctorate student under somebody else's license, but you can get paid for that, which is a pretty significant thing. I have a couple of colleagues who got involved with that, and they're making like pretty good money on the side doing like therapy on weekends, which I wish I had gotten involved with that, or at least considered. I didn't really look into that because just of my own kind of limits on what I wanted to involve myself with and what I didn't, what I wanted to take on, and what I wanted to kind of put off for later. But that is another very real benefit of having it. It's not just a paperweight. So
yeah, absolutely, that's so cool. Awesome. So let's see. So kind of going back to the dissertation, because I forgot to ask this question, I think, what is the process of completing it, and then what happens when you're done?
Yeah, so completing it, you're going to, it's a long, very kind of complicated process where you have to clear it through all these people, you have to submit it to your chair for revisions, and then you have a reviewer who looks at it, then an outside reviewer who looks at it and gives you feedback, and you kind of have to address all those things. There are a lot of steps along the way you have to clear, but eventually it all kind of accumulates in defending it, and kind of presenting, what your findings were, and answering questions about it. And after that, if you wanted to be done with it, you could be done with it. A lot of people, at least look into the possibility of submitting it to peer-reviewed journals to get them published. And, I've had some colleagues who are a few years in front of me do that, and they got to present their research at conferences, or you can get to see it in a journal, which has been like a really cool experience for them.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm thinking about doing, maybe, especially because I'm doing a kind of a more sports psychology focused
Yeah.
dissertation, and the research in kind of the field in sports psychology just in general is a bit sparse. It's not very well fleshed out. So like I feel like I would have like a reasonably like good shot of maybe like presenting it or doing something cool like that. But we'll see what happens down the road.
Well, that's exciting for sure. It's nice to see like your hard work recognized as well. So kind of moving forward a bit. So when you did your work at SDJC, what were your clients' main issues or problems that made them seek psychotherapy? What does this session kind of look like with you, including like those treatment modalities, those things?
Those what?
Like the kind of treatment modalities that you prefer to use. So you mentioned like ACT, we've talked about CBT before, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so at Job Corps, a lot of reasons why clients would kind of be urged to be seen by our department were mostly issues related to kind of adjusting to being away from home for like an extended period for the first time, kind of concerns with depression or anxiety. In the two groups I ran, the healthy emotions group and the anger management group, I had students get referred to that by the administration there, or from their teachers, or from their RAs in their dorms, or some who self-referred because they were struggling. So like it was a pretty not necessarily wide range, but like it was a pretty I certainly worked with a diverse group of clients from all different backgrounds, and being able to kind of listen to them in treatment with kind of a culturally sensitive ear was, I think, very important. And in terms of actually doing like treatment, I think it varies. Like a session like with me kind of varies depending on the setting. And kind of more traditional psychotherapy, whether it was at Job Corps or at the recovery center, it was kind of more similar to what you might think of therapy to normally be like, which is where you kind of come in and you sit down and you talk about what's going on, maybe things in the past or things in the future that are kind of on your mind. And my approach to psychotherapy in general is more of a behavioral approach, and what that means is kind of like a more focused on looking at like problem focused or solution focused approaches to providing therapy. So kind of looking at ways that and this can get sometimes like it can be just as simple as like giving practical advice about like especially at Job Corps, like study skills, or sleep hygiene is what it's called. So clients who came in with like insomnia or things like that, skills to kind of help them learn to cope better with stressful situations, so like mindfulness, deep breathing, but also kind of interweaving, because I feel like those kind of just interventions is what they're called, those can get kind of like I don't know, a little almost like too simplistic. So like kind of like weaving in like a very like compassionate and empathetic approach to interacting with patients and clients. Like I think that provides like a space where clients can feel like safe and validated, and like they're being heard. And like I think that is something that it's probably like not unique just to psychotherapy, but just like kind of any like close human relationship. So like I kind of, I love, some of those concepts in humanistic psychology of, providing, patients with warmth and genuineness. And, that is a major part of, you know, doing this sort of work with people, is being able to provide that for them. At the burn unit, it's a lot different because I'm kind of being brought in to meet with patients by their doctors or their RNs. So that is a lot more structured and a lot more focused. And that's like a pretty short term thing where, a lot of clients, I'll meet with them for, 30 minutes. And then, next time I'm back, they've been discharged. But
More
that's
kind of
like, I think,
evaluation than like
yeah,
treatment.
evaluation, but also also kind of brief psychological interventions. And I think this is where kind of learning about ACT and CBT, like I think like that's where kind of taking a more not necessarily directive, but like more kind of like structured approach, like has been like, that's where it's warranted. And I think learning about just looking back on my time at SDSU, probably the most important class I took, and I didn't realize it at the time, was Psych 211, which was the psychology of learning. And like being able to kind of look at, okay, what events, how does the client's current issues, how is it related to things that have happened in the past, and and how things, how this pattern is played out in the future, and what are some of the variables that that I can change right here and now with that client, and kind of see what the outcome is like for them. And I think that's where being able to consume research and literature about the field, and being able to take this kind of like almost like scientist mindset to exploring clients' problems is very important to being an effective provider.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Let's see. So how do you kind of maintain the balance between, we kind of talked about it or way earlier on, but like the research, studying, classes, personal life? How do you avoid burnout if you have any hard cases? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think probably the most essential thing that I did that made a big impact on just my well-being in grad school was deciding to kind of be very intentional about what I took on, what I agreed to involve myself with. Because in the first year of grad school, and then maybe it was just that kind of like like initial high of being like, oh, I'm in grad school, I'm doing all this, I'm doing all that, this is so exciting. I was involved in a lot of stuff. I was involved in the OCD lab. I was working, a part-time job. I was going to my practicum. I was taking, a full load of classes, and like I was able, like it turned out fine. But like looking back on it, I was like, wow, like I did a lot of stuff that like I really, I really didn't enjoy doing. I would have, if I had the choice, like I would have created more free time for myself. And I think, in terms of kind of connecting with my values, because that's a big thing in ACT, is like looking at, what is it that, is important to you? Like what kind of qualities of actions, or like what kind of qualities like would you like to have in your life if you could choose? And I think for me, like an important value was having like, time for myself, being able to kind of have the freedom to pick and choose what I wanted to do with like, my free time aside from school and practicum. And so like kind of looking at, okay, like this is what's really important to me right now, like school and practicum, like the lab and the part-time job, like those things, like I probably could go without. And so like it wasn't easy to be like, oh, like I'm quitting, like I'm gonna start transitioning out of here to both of those things. So I was there for over a year with both of them, and I made some really great connections there. I met some great people, and I learned a lot, especially from the OCD lab. But I think once I decided, okay, I can take my foot off the gas pedal a little bit, I think that made a huge difference. And just like I felt like this weight was off my shoulders. And I think another thing too, like like especially in, you know, grad school for psychology, is that, you know, you will be kind of traveling all over the place, especially if, you know, you're going to the clinic, and then, you know, you're going to school, and then you're going to, you know, this, that, and the other thing that you might have. That's a lot of traveling. And so like my practicum last year was up in Carlsbad, and that was like best case scenario, like a 40-minute drive. You know, like if there was absolutely no traffic, and like I really was not like feeling that drive. And it's funny, like there's a big like there's research that shows that like a big predictor of your happiness is like how long your commute is. Like that's one of the things that like can influence your well-being. And so like my practicum this year at UCSD is like 5 minutes from my house. And it's like it's amazing. Like it's just like I don't feel like I'm, you know, stressed to get out. And so like those kind of things too, like, you know, your commutes, and, you know, like all the time that you spend doing things that, you know, you're not necessarily, you know, you wouldn't be willing to do that if you, like, if somebody didn't tell you you should be doing it. Like, you know, really think about you know, what those things are that you would freely choose to do, and try to minimize, or not minimize, but like be smart about how much time you do things that you might not, you know, that you would rather avoid if you had the choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Prioritize.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there anything like, or any misconceptions that you held, or you know that other people hold about psychotherapy that is just like totally the opposite of what people expect or what you expected?
I think as you know, as a kind of a therapist on like the younger end, where, you know, I had come out just from grad school, you know, I had talked about that imposter syndrome, and I think like it's very easy to think that like, you know, someone's therapist might have it all together, but like, you know, it really like, you know, it really like, especially at the start, like you don't feel that way. And you know, I think, you know, it's really easy to kind of look at, you know, like psychotherapists as like this kind of like, you know, just like blank figure, just kind of reflecting things back at you while you're talking to them. You know, that has not been the case at all. Like even in like kind of like very short, like brief meetings that I've had with patients on the burn center, like, you know, like you really like, you know, deeply like connect with these people in like a very genuine way, because like, you know, like at the burn unit, like these people are at like the lowest points of their lives, and, you know, being able to just, you know, listen to them, like, and what they have to say, and kind of, you know, provide them with that space to process their feelings. Like that's like something that like, you know, like I still think about, like, you know, with certain clients or with certain cases, like, and it can be really difficult too, like no doubt. Like I think like a lot of people think that like psychologists like are just these perfect, like, you know, like perfect at coping with anything that comes up, because that's certainly what I, you know, thought when I was an undergrad. But yeah, psychologists do not, we do not as a profession have our shit together. We are just as impacted by, you know, what happens, you know, in the world with our client. You good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm okay. We're good.
But yeah, like I think you know, yeah, like we're people too. We're not just like these robots that are reflecting what you're saying.
And is it common, would you say, for, you know, therapists to have a therapist?
Yeah, actually that is something that's required in my program, and in a lot of programs. They call it like professional development hours, or personal development hours, personal growth hours. And you know, you have to see a therapist for you know, X amount of, not a therapist but a psychologist specifically for like 40 hours. So like it's, I think it's definitely like, you know, a thing that should be common practice at for a lot of helping professions, because like, you know, you are dealing with a lot of, you know, a lot of stressful things, and kind of you know, I think it's, you know, it's essential. Yeah, I mean, like self-care, like psychologists practicing self-care for themselves is in the ethics code of the APA. So like, you know, like this is something that, you know, how can we possibly, you know, say to our clients, like, you know, like, oh, like, you know, like it's really good that you're seeking help for like whatever thing they're going to you for, when you're not willing to do that for them or do that for yourself. So like I think it is like definitely, there's definitely no issue with a therapist seeing a therapist if it's for, you know, if it's to help them, you know, work through what it is they're going through as a therapist themselves.
Absolutely. Let's see, what else did I have? What's been kind of like maybe the most challenging and most rewarding aspects of the program?
Yeah, I think let's see. I think one really challenging thing that also, you know, turned out being really rewarding was going through this APA or just like the process of applying to places and, you know, getting rejections from sites that, you know, maybe I really wanted to go to,
Yeah.
you know, and like, you know, like not necessarily having things work out exactly as I, you know, thought them out in my mind, how I wanted them to go. Those things almost never turn out to go exactly to plan. And I
Yeah.
think like in a way, like that's been a really rewarding opportunity for me to practice like, you know, flexibility in the face of, you know, uncertainty and, you know, going forward and, you know, going to these interviews, even if I've, you know, even if I didn't necessarily like, you know, get as many like invitations to interview at internship sites as I wanted, like, you know, still, you know, going in there and, you know, doing it anyways, even if, you know, I was like, oh, you know, like, am I missing something? And I ended up, you know, it ended up working out for me. And I, you know, got a site that I was really excited about, not just with my internship, but also with the burn unit. You know, I had applied there as a second year or going into my second year. And, you know, unfortunately I wasn't offered the position, but I came back a year later after not getting, you know, the practicum site that I wanted to get, you know, going into my third year. I was fortunate enough to still have that opportunity to apply to the burn unit again, and I got it. And it's been, you know, a really wonderful experience, you know, being there. It's been probably the best work environment I've ever been in my life, genuinely. And so, yeah, like, you know, I think being in this, in a psychology grad school program, like it definitely prepares you to you know, learn to cope with failure and, you know, ultimately like savor like the reward of, you know, having things finally work out. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, do you have any other or additional advice for maybe students who are thinking about graduate school or clinical work that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I think like one like important thing that, you know, anybody who is interested in getting their doctorate in psychology, like I think a very important kind of like self exercise to do is to like think like, if you're unsure of like what, you know, what it is that you want to do in psychology, like, you know, maybe you're considering a doctorate, is to think to yourself like, okay, like, you know, like imagine like nobody will ever know that, you know, I'll have my doctorate in psychology. Like, would it still be something that, you know, I would freely choose to do? And if the answer is, you know, yes, then, you know, then go forward and, you know, and start down that path. But if the answer is no, they do not do it, because you will be wasting your time.
Yeah.
And I think like, you know, it's very easy to get caught up in like, you know, kind of like, oh, like, you know, I have this degree or I have that degree, or, you know, even within the field itself, like, oh, like, you know, I practice this sort of therapy versus that sort of therapy. And it gets very like, you know, like there are these like camps, you know, of like different people, and like, but like ultimately like those are just kind of like arbitrary things that like don't really matter all that much in like the long run. And so like the closer that you can like kind of you know, clarify what's important specifically to you and not to anybody else, like the closer, like the sooner you can do that, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that really, you know, pays dividends down the line.
Yeah. And I think like something that Dr. Turner in advising told us all is like your goal should never be to have the label, right? Like I shouldn't go to a doctoral program so I can be doctor. If that's your
Yeah.
main goal, it's going to be a hell of a road. But if your
Yeah.
main goal is to just be a clinician, you don't need to get your doctorate, right? Like there are other ways to go about it that may, so it just really depends on your overall goals, how limited or kind of generalizable you want to be. But it shouldn't be the label itself.
Yeah. And like, even like if your main value is like, wanting to help others, like values are things that are like, those aren't like things that are like way off in the future. Like values are things that like you can be like doing like right now. And so like, if you value helping other people, like, think about like ways that, you can, help somebody else right now. If that's like the main value that's motivating you to like be a part of the field of psychology, like, consider ways that, you can live by those values right now, like while you're in undergrad. And, in doing that, I think that'll make, that position of, where you can, in grad school interviews, when they ask you about, why do you want to get into this field, you can speak from that with like a sense of like real, like, truth and like,
Yeah.
and from like a real genuine place. And yeah, like it's something that, that will stick with you regardless of whether you ultimately pursue, a field in, clinical psychology or not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's awesome. Was there anything else? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that was quite a, let me take a look at all these questions and we'll see if there's anything. Let me pull up my email. Okay, here we go. I mean, it looks like a lot of these, we went over for sure.
Yeah. Or they overlap within a question.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, cool.
Well, awesome. It was great having you. I know students will benefit from this. And is it okay for me to share your contact information with interested students?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I look forward to hearing from, what's that?
Well, I was saying, should I use the email I see here or the one I usually contact you with?
Is it the on there? Is it the Alliant email?
Uh-huh.
It doesn't matter, the Hotmail or the Alliant one. I check them both pretty frequently. So yeah, I totally am more than happy to answer any questions, because something I value is also, helping other people who kind of were in the same position I was in, 5 years ago.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Casey. It's been great.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you, Cassie.
Yeah.